When veteran actor Brian Cox walked onto the set of Lorraine, the atmosphere was meant to be lighthearted. The producers expected charming stories about his long career, his success with Succession, and a few witty remarks about Hollywood. But within minutes, it became clear, this interview was heading toward chaos. Lorraine Kelly, always the smiling morning host, greeted him warmly. "Brian, darling, you look wonderful. Congratulations on another brilliant year. You must be so proud of everything you've accomplished." Cox smiled politely, leaning back in his chair. "Proud? Maybe. But I'm more worried about what people are doing to the craft. It's not acting anymore, it's content. Everything's about clicks, not truth." Lorraine blinked, unsure how to respond. "Well, that's quite a strong opinion. Don't you think audiences are just evolving?" Brian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Evolving? No. They're being trained. People watch whatever's loudest or most scandalous. That's not evolution, that's manipulation." The audience chuckled awkwardly, unsure if he was joking. Lorraine tried to lighten the mood. "You've always had such passion for the art. But come on, Brian, there's still plenty of great work out there. Look at Succession. That show had everyone talking." Cox leaned forward. "And that's the problem, Lorraine. Everyone was talking, not listening. They turned it into memes and gossip. They missed the message, that the world's run by liars who mistake cruelty for strength." There was a pause. Lorraine's producer made a small gesture from off-camera, signaling her to move on. She smiled, visibly tense. "All right, well, let's talk about your new project. You've been directing lately, haven't you?" Brian sighed deeply. "Yes. And I'm doing it because I can't stand waiting for someone else to make something real. Everyone's afraid to offend anyone. Art should offend, it should wake people up." At that, Lorraine's polite tone shifted. "I think people are just trying to be respectful, Brian. The world's changed. We have to be mindful." Cox gave a low, cynical laugh. "Mindful. That word's become an excuse for mediocrity. You can't create truth if you're terrified of being cancelled." The studio audience grew restless. Some clapped nervously, others whispered. Lorraine's producer whispered in her earpiece, "Wrap it up soon." But she wasn't done. Something about his tone irritated her. "Brian," she said firmly, "you talk about truth and courage, but don't you think there's a line? Actors have influence. When they speak, people listen. Don't you have some responsibility to be careful with your words?" Cox crossed his arms. "Careful words are useless words, Lorraine. I'd rather speak the truth and be hated than play polite and be hollow." Lorraine's trademark smile faltered. "So you're saying the rest of us are hollow?" He shrugged. "If the shoe fits." A sharp gasp went through the audience. The tension was now electric. Lorraine glanced at the camera, they were still live. She forced a laugh. "All right, Brian, we'll take that as your Scottish charm showing through." But Cox didn't smile. "No, Lorraine, I'm serious. The media, including shows like this, have turned conversation into performance. You pretend to care, but the moment it gets uncomfortable, you smile and change the subject." Lorraine's face flushed. "Well, maybe I don't think shouting at people is the best way to change the world." "Maybe that's why nothing changes," Brian shot back. For a few seconds, silence filled the studio. Cameras kept rolling, and the tension was visible on every face. Lorraine's professionalism cracked. She looked directly at her producer and said softly, "Can we cut to a break, please?" The show abruptly faded to commercials. What the audience didn't see was what happened next. As the music played, Lorraine turned to Brian. "I don't appreciate being insulted on my own program." Brian stood, unbothered. "Then maybe stop inviting people who tell the truth." The floor manager stepped between them, gently guiding him off the stage. "Mr. Cox, thank you, but I think we're done here." Cox looked back once more. "That's the problem with this industry. You only want honesty if it's flattering." And with that, he walked out, leaving the host, the crew, and a stunned audience in complete silence. When the show returned from break, Lorraine smiled tightly and said, "Apologies, everyone." That was Brian Cox, always passionate. Her tone was light, but her eyes told another story. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips of the argument spread across Twitter and TikTok. Some praised Cox for his brutal honesty, finally, someone saying what we all think. Others accused him of arrogance, calling the exchange unprofessional and rude. By afternoon, Lorraine's production team released a statement. Greater than, we value open conversation, but we also believe in respect and kindness. The interview with Mr. Cox took an unexpected turn, and we decided to end it early. Cox, however, doubled down. On his Instagram, he posted a short message. Greater than, if truth makes people uncomfortable, good. Maybe they'll start asking why. The clash became the most talked about segment of the week, not just for its drama, but for the uncomfortable question it left hanging. Was Brian Cox simply being rude, or was he the only one in the room brave enough to tell the truth? By the next morning, every headline in the British tabloids was about one thing: Brian Cox versus Lorraine Kelly. Greater than, Brian Cox explodes on live TV. Lorraine Kelly left speechless after actors on air meltdown. Succession star storms off set. What really happened? The internet was divided. Some called him a grumpy old man who couldn't handle friendly questions. Others said he was a national treasure for exposing how shallow daytime television had become. But for Brian Cox, it wasn't about fame or scandal, it was about truth. That morning, while social media burned with opinions, Brian sat alone in his Edinburgh study, sipping black coffee. His phone buzzed non-stop: agents, journalists, friends. He ignored most of them. Until one message caught his eye. Greater than, Brian, I saw what happened. Don't back down. They needed to hear it. It was from Sir Ian McKellen. Brian smiled faintly. He typed back. Greater than, they won't invite me back, that's for sure. Ian replied almost instantly. Maybe it's time they stopped inviting liars and started inviting truth-tellers. That message stayed with him. By noon, his PR manager called. Brian, ITV is furious. Lorraine's team says you humiliated her. They want an apology. An apology for what? He asked calmly. For speaking honestly. They're saying you called her hollow. I didn't call her hollow, he said. I called the system hollow. There's a difference. But the network didn't care about differences, they cared about damage control. By evening, ITV quietly announced that Brian Cox would be taking a break from future appearances. Cox didn't argue. He simply posted on his social media. Greater than, I won't apologize for saying what I believe. Television needs less pretending and more truth. Until then, I'll find other ways to speak. That post hit a nerve. Within hours, it had millions of views. Young actors began resharing it with the hashtag Cox was right. Famous directors, theater critics, and fans joined in, praising him for challenging the media's hypocrisy. Lorraine Kelly, however, faced her own storm. Her show's comment section flooded with messages, some defending her grace under pressure, others accusing her of silencing real discussion. During her next broadcast, Lorraine addressed it directly. I want to say, she began, voice steady but eyes tired, Brian Cox is an extraordinary actor. I respect him deeply. We just had a difference of opinion, that's television. I've no hard feelings. It was a diplomatic move, but viewers could sense it, she was still hurt. Meanwhile, Brian received an unexpected call from a BBC journalist inviting him to appear on a serious evening program to clarify his statements. He agreed, but on one condition: no scripts, no pre-approved questions. That night, millions tuned in. The host began gently, Brian, after what happened on Lorraine, people are asking, are you angry with the media, or just frustrated with the world? Brian leaned forward, calm but intense. I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. We used to have journalists who challenged power, artists who took risks. Now it's all smiles and soundbites. Nobody dares to be real anymore. The interviewer nodded. Some said your tone toward Lorraine was too harsh. He exhaled. Maybe it was. I respect Lorraine, she's kind, she's done this job for years. But that's exactly the issue. We've built a culture where being nice is more important than being honest. I don't believe in cruelty, but I don't believe in sugarcoating, either. He paused, letting the silence hang. Then he added, you can't wake people up by whispering lullabies. That line went viral overnight. It became a quote on posters, memes, and even political speeches. Suddenly, Brian Cox wasn't just an actor, he'd become a voice for frustration, for people who felt unheard and tired of pretense. But fame has a strange way of twisting truth. A week later, tabloid headlines changed tone again. Greater than, Brian Cox banned from ITV shows. Sources claim actor's behavior behind the scenes was difficult. It was damage control, a way to paint him as the villain. When a reporter asked him about it outside his London apartment, he just smiled and said, "If telling the truth makes me difficult, then I've been difficult all my life." Behind the scenes, Lorraine sent him a handwritten letter. It read, "Greater than Brian, despite everything, I do admire your passion. Maybe we both just wanted to be heard. Take care." He smiled at that, not out of victory, but recognition. She wasn't his enemy, she was just part of the machine, like everyone else. Months later, Brian returned to theater, directing a new play titled, Noise. It was about a talk show host and a guest who accidentally reveal each other's truths on live television. Critics called it a raw masterpiece. In the final scene, the host asks the guest, "Why did you come here if you knew it would destroy you?" And the guest replies, "Greater than, because destruction is the first step to rebuilding something real." Audiences stood in silent awe. They understood, it wasn't just a play. It was Brian Cox's confession, his reflection, his redemption. The clash with Lorraine Kelly wasn't a scandal anymore. It had become a symbol of honesty clashing with comfort, of art battling entertainment, of truth daring to speak in a world afraid to listen. And as Brian walked off stage after the final performance, he whispered to himself,